This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of people with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 456, DDEV Grows Up. This episode of Talking Drupal is sponsored by Hero Devs. On today's show, we are talking about DDEV, the DDEV community, and its future sustainability with our guests, Randy Fay and Andrew Berry. We'll also cover DDEV Drupal Contrib as our module of the week. Welcome to Talking Drupal. Our guests today are Randy Fay and Andrew Berry. Randy is an old Drupal hack and an old hack in general who has ended up maintaining DDEV these many years. He loves helping people out with their local development and website trouble, and has also had quite a life of bike packing. Andrew is the director of technology at Lullabot, who's been working with Drupal since the mid-2000s. He's been at Lullabot since 2010, working with Drupal and contributing along the way. If you want to nerd snipe him, ask him about either espresso or home automation or both. Randy and Andrew, welcome to the show. And thank you for joining us for the last 4 weeks, Randy.
Great to be here. Loads of fun.
Yeah, glad to be here as well.
I'm Nick Laughlin, founder at Enlightened Development. And today my co-hosts are, as usual, John Picozzi, solutions architect at EPAM.
So I have another dumb question, and literally just got here already asking a dumb question. Nerd sniping. What is that?
Oh, okay. There's an XKCD comic about nerd sniping, and I don't think I can describe it fairly in words. But
enough said.
You think of it as an analogy for distracting people with really deep, specific technical problems.
And now, to talk about our module of the week, let's turn it over to Martin Anderson-Klutz, a senior solutions engineer at Acquia and a maintainer of a number of Drupal modules and recipes of his own. Before we get to the module of the week, Martin, just really quickly, how has it been converting a lot of your modules to recipes? Because I'm actually about to start setting up some of my own.
So I'll say that I actually got some help initially from Jim Birch and one of his colleagues at Canopy. So they actually did some of the heavy lifting in terms of getting the Smart Date Starter Kit and the Smart Date Calendar Kit converted to recipes. And so I was able to kind of look back at the work that they had done and use that as reference. But now that I've done a few others, in general, it doesn't seem to require a lot. I think the trickiest bits have been that I've had some modules that provided some initial configuration and then also had a little bit of functional code. And so sort of figuring out how to sort of split that off into a separate project, or maybe, is it worth preserving as a separate project? Some of those have probably been the more complicated parts than actually just sort of creating the recipe itself.
That's one of the design intentional limitations around recipes, right? That you can't have executable code as part of the recipe.
Yeah,
exactly.
As Adam or Finder Proxima I've seen saying multiple times in Starshot, recipes are applied, they're not installed. And that goes directly to your point, Andrew. No executable code, it's just config. All right, Martin, what do you have for us this week for module of the week?
Thanks, Nick. Have you ever wanted a local DDEV environment optimized for working on a Drupal Contrib project? There's a DDEV add-on for that. It's called DDEV Drupal Contrib, and it was created in April of 2023 by Moshe Weitzman, a Drupal core maintainer, and according to his resume, the first American to contribute to Drupal. It has a 1.0.0 RC8 version available. It is actively maintained. It does have test coverage, as well as a lengthy README for documentation. The GitHub project currently has 2 open issues, one of which is a bug. Now, the add-on adds 2 DDEV commands to help during setup. There's a DDEV poser command, which creates a temporary composer contrib.json, adding Drupal/core recommended as a dev dependency. It also runs composer install and yarn install so that all dependencies are available. The additional DDEV symlink project command adds symlinks from your project files to an expected path within the custom modules directory of the installed version of Drupal. Once it's set up, you can easily run tests locally exactly the way they will be run in GitLab CI. And it's even easier to apply any of the automatic fixes that are available, for example, by running DDEV PHP CBF or DDEV ESLint with the fix tag. You can also commit the generated DDEV directory inside your project to make it easy for other contributors to use the same tools. I will note that after running DDEV Poser, I got errors trying to use Composer to add any other projects to the local environment, for example, to use admin toolbar for manual testing. That said, this is another great example of how the set of Drupal developer tools is always improving, and it also illustrates the power of DDEV's add-on system. So with that, let's talk about DDEV Drupal Contrib.
Okay. I got a hypothetical because I think this will solve my problem, but I just want to make sure I'm understanding what you're saying. So last week, I was working on Project Browser, and I was like, oh, I don't have Yarn installed on my laptop, so let me spin up a DDEV container and download the project code just so I can run Yarn. And then I had to go, like, I did my thing, and then I was like, oh, now I have to test it. And I was like, oh, let me spin up another DDEV container to go like build Drupal and like add the project code and do. So like you're telling me I could just use this and it would do all of those things for me and kind of keep that project code in its own Git repo and not kind of mess it up.
I would say that's the idea. Is it's really meant to be sort of an environment specifically for working on a Contrib project that has sort of all of those tools available. And I think also the fact that it is sort of built to mirror how the GitLab CI is going to run a lot of those tests also makes it easier to be able to fix those locally where they're sort of fast to run and easy to apply the fixes, as opposed to sort of creating a merge request, making some changes, pushing it up, waiting for the CI job to run, seeing that feedback, and then sort of, that's a much slower sort of iteration than being able to do those locally.
Yeah, there's also a couple of other problems I think that this solves. I'm gonna have to check this out, by the way, but when you're working on a module or an issue, you're cloning a specific issue fork. But when you require a project, it's requiring a particular tag. So, but when you're running tests, you generally need Drupal core to be there because most tests in Contrib build on top of the Drupal testing suite. So what can happen is if you have your module inside of core and then you accidentally run like Composer installer or something, it is liable to like blow away all your work because it's going to be like, oh, these things have changed. It's just going to install the tag again. So there's been actually a few other tools that have built up around this that kind of solve a similar problem. Because I was actually asking Matt Glomman when he was on as guest host a couple of months back how he solved this, because I was running into issues trying to figure out the best way to test some modules I was working on. And what he does is he just has a separate Drupal install for all the modules he's working on, and he just clones them in. But I've found Joachim's Drupal project Contrib development composer plugin has a convenient command for switching between the composer version of a project and the GitLab version of a project. But it has the same risk as if you run. Well, it does like symlinking and stuff, so things can get a little funky in DDEV, and you can still wipe things out. But I'll have to try this out because I haven't found like the perfect recipe yet. And it's funny because it's not until you start editing several modules and modules that you don't necessarily maintain that this becomes an issue. But once you start editing quite a few modules and or fixing bugs in quite a few modules, it becomes a real hassle to switch between projects.
So Nick, when you say recipe, you mean combination of things to make things work, right?
Yeah, not a Drupal recipe.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Just wanted to clarify there.
Yeah, no, I meant it more colloquially. But yeah, I'll have to try this out because it's definitely a problem I've run into this year. Mm-hmm. That it'd be nice if there'd be a solution for that.
And again, go ahead, Randy.
Yeah, to me, the great thing here is Moshe creating and maintaining this thing. So, DDEV, there was a time when DDEV was just a web server and a DB server. And yeah, I knew how those, would work with different CMSs and stuff. But as people make all these different things and different approaches to using the things, the fact that we can have maintainers from the specific places with the specific expertise. So Moshe really knows how to do this. And he maintains a couple of these. And that's true of the, the solar add-on, and all of the add-ons have, or most of them have maintainers who have specific expertise. And so that is such a win, because there's just no way that I can understand all the different add-ons or all the different problem spaces of the people that use DDEV. So it is a wonderful thing. It is a wonderful thing to count on Moshe's work on this one. Motion community. The community's been, very, very active in there.
Randy, I have a question, because this is not a Drupal module of which I know how to install. It's a DDEV add-on, right? So I'm wondering, when you're using an add-on in DDEV, can you install it globally, or is it per project that you would have to install this?
It's per project. They're all built around per project. So definitely per project.
Cool.
And maybe just to clarify there, John, the way you would use this with a project is actually by initially cloning the Drupal module or whatever project, and then installing that into there, and then it actually sort of builds a Drupal site within that project folder.
Yeah. So I'm reading the install steps on the GitHub page, which are very clear. I was just more, I was more questioning in general with add-ons, like how add-ons work. Yeah. But per project makes sense. Go ahead.
I have to say, I think that's a huge advantage over the other approach, by the way, because, and this, with the other approach, like at this point, I have, 8 or 10 module ecosystems installed on that Drupal site. I've got ECA, I've got commerce, I've got all sorts of stuff. And as you add additional dependencies, sometimes things go can get a little wacky. And when you're getting ready to do a major version upgrade, which is a lot of the work that's happening right now, you can get Composer in a weird state where it can't upgrade either. Now, that's going to be an issue with the DDEV add-on as well. Like Composer will detect that there's an incompatibility, but it's more of an issue if you have a bunch of different projects in one site, so to speak, rather than multiple. I'm gonna have to try this out. It looks like it'll actually solve a problem that I've been having the last few weeks.
Yeah, I tried it out with the event platform, which has a ton of dependencies. So to be able to just clone the project down and then have it, pull in all of those dependencies and drop those in for me was actually quite a significant time saver. So definitely a fan of this one.
I feel like this is also not the first time someone's tackled this problem. I can't find it right now, but I did find like there's another similar project that was just created 7 months ago, and it's not a fork of this one. I remember using one from before this existed that I forget why I didn't stick with it. But like what I think is neat about the way the DDEV add-on system works is that there's not necessarily, like, it doesn't force there to be one solution to everything. It's really easy to just start creating an add-on and see where you get. And if you have a new idea on how to approach something, then you just follow the add-on template and you've got something up and running and working. And it's, really great to get quick feedback from others in the DDEV community, like, hey, is this actually a good idea, or should I just go and archive this repository now before it causes more damage?
Before anybody notices.
Right.
And Andrew maintains a few, right? So
yeah, I maintain one that adds Playwright support to DDEV for running automated tests, and that one isn't Drupal specific at all. It's just getting Playwright in place within the web container. And then there is one which is Drupal specific, which kind of does something similar to what we do with Drupal core, where you get a fresh site install for each test that you run. You can run them in parallel. You can run them with Chrome, Firefox, WebKit, and get your tests going. And that one is, very much tied to Drupal, because it handles doing like the site install and running Drush and getting things going. But I can't think of a time I've had to go to Randy and say, hey, DDEV can't do this. I need something changed in DDEV to support this complicated workflow, which is pretty neat.
That actually is where add-ons came from, because people would always ask for, oh, I need this, and oh, I need that. And if you put in everybody's, oh, I need, then everybody it's just never, can't ever work. But people can get the add-ons that they need, and the world is it's a better place. And each of the add-ons has an issue queue and its own README and its own tests. And for add-ons to be promoted to official add-ons, which means they're in the DDEV namespace, they have to have test coverage. So that's it really is just that the having multiple maintainers and separate issue queues is just the best thing in the world.
Well, thank you, Martin. As always, a really on topic non-module of the week. How can folks connect with you or suggest a module of the week for the future?
We are always happy to get nominations for module of the week in the Talking Drupal channel of Drupal Slack, or they can reach out to me directly as ManClue in all of the Drupal and social platforms.
All right. See you next week. This episode of Talking Drupal is sponsored by Hero Devs. Let's talk about life after Drupal 7 end of life. Since August 2023, there's been a lot of discussion about Drupal 7's official end of life in January of 2025. It's no secret that many companies, organizations, and individuals are still on Drupal 7 and have yet to migrate. I think we can all agree that migration, while beneficial, is not always feasible, and this is where Hero Devs comes in. Hero Devs has partnered with core team maintainers of Drupal 7 to build and maintain the Drupal 7 never-ending support product, ensuring the same quality of support that you have come to expect over the years. Drupal 7 Never-Ending Support, or NES, allows for an effortless transition, allowing your site to remain secure, compliant, and compatible after Drupal 7 goes end of life. This allows you to migrate on your own time or potentially not at all. Hero Devs promises to keep Drupal 7 alive and well, even offering support for the current top 100 Drupal 7 modules. If you'd like to know more about Drupal 7 Never-Ending Support, visit herodevs.com. That's HERODEVS.com. All right, now on to our primary topic. Randy, in March, you posted the DDEV project plan for 2024, and the first item in that plan is community, where you say you're going to continue the contributor training initiative. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is? Actually,
yeah.
Wait, I think we might be putting the cart before the horse. We're all familiar with DDEV, but for our listeners who may not be familiar with DDEV, can you first tell us what DDEV is?
Oh, if I can find out. Yeah, I do know what DDEV is. So DDEV, I'm glad you started with that. DDEV, its goal is to make it easy for web developers to develop locally on their own machine. When I'm explaining it to people who don't know anything about local development or development, maybe, I say that a bunch of artists can't share a single canvas. They can't be working on the pieces of their art at the same time on the same canvas. And the same is true with teams of developers. They each have to work in their own place. And DDEV's job is to give everybody their own place to work on developing a website, especially the code of a website. So DDEV grew out of the Drupal community, but it works great with very many CMSs, mostly PHP CMSs, but it also has young support for Python, Django, that class of things. But DDEV is there to make it so that web developers can work on their website on their own machine.
And for our more technically minded folks, it's a Docker wrapper, right? So it wraps itself around Docker and makes things easy to integrate, right?
If you look at the things it does, the easiest way to think about it is as a Docker wrapper. But if you know how many lines of code in how many different languages, you might not think of it that way anymore.
All right. So back to the original question I started with. What is the contributor training initiative, and how do you plan on working on that this year?
Yeah, so last year we've been thinking for some time, and the advisory group, which Andrew's a member of, has been pushing on the whole ideas of sustainability, financial sustainability, and that kind of thing for quite a long time. And last year I posted a blog post that said, we're looking for maintainers. We want to hire and pay maintainers. And immediately we had job applications from people who weren't involved with DDEV at all, who had no qualifications, who had nothing to offer, who hadn't proven any idea how to contribute. So we immediately had to like dial that back and say, oh, wait a minute, we have to grow maintainers. So what we said then is we're going to have a contributor/maintainer training. So we started every week or couple of weeks, and we've been through many topics now where we do live training on a particular DDEV topic. And the topics that we've done with all the recordings and a number of blog posts are in the show notes. And we have, it's really excellent, and it pays off for the longer term, because you can't put into docs exactly the kind of things that you do when you're trying to train somebody. How are you going to spin up a Go development environment or those kind of things? So,
yeah, I also think something that we saw with that is how DDEV is kind of like the most complicated stack a developer might need to work with in our industry, because you've got to understand Docker, you've got to understand all the components of a web server, like how does Nginx work, how does Apache work, how does MariaDB or Postgres or what have you. You've got to understand enough about, like, say, writing in PHP to know how CMSs like Drupal or Typo3 or WordPress might work. And, what happens when someone reports a bug with something with Node.js or Yarn or NPM or something that they're seeing inside of it. Like the breadth of skills that you need is so much wider than like the typical developer's day-to-day work, that I think having these contributor training workshops has been a really good way to address that, because Randy's sort of taking all of these different topics and then narrowing them down into one bite-sized chunk that someone could maybe spend a week or two learning on and, be productive in that area.
The great thing for developers using DDEV is that this stuff is all packaged up. But for contributors to DDEV, it's like all of a sudden having to be a full-blown DevOps person, having to understand all of the things, like Andrew said, that go into DevOps. And there is a lot of things. And there's Bash, and there's Docker, and there's Apache, and there's Nginx, and there's PHP, and there's on and JavaScript, and on and port mapping, and TCP, and just the routers, and it just goes on and on.
So, over the last couple of months, I've seen quite a few developer surveys. Results come out, and it appears that over the last year, but more so over the last few years, DDEV has seen kind of a bit of growth in its community and its adoption, its use, right? And I'm going to ask this question to both of you, but I'm actually going to start with Andrew, because I'm interested from the perspective of a director of technology for an agency, right? What do you attribute that growth to?
I mean, the one sentence answer is DDEV is an excellent product that doesn't get in our way and lets us get our work done faster and easier. The more complicated answer is that, from our perspective at Lullabot, when I joined, years and years ago, and up until actually relatively recently, we didn't have a standardized development environment. We kind of expected our team members to, use what works for them. And we have a very heterogeneous team. We have people on Macs, on Linux, on Windows, and it was like, you do what's best for you. And one of the challenges over time is that the stack itself has simply become more complicated to a point where it's like, hey, every project needs something beyond just the very basics of, Apache, PHP, MySQL, whether that's Redis for caching or Elasticsearch or, some other service. And so, we did some explorations into some other tools sort of earlier on, but we actually had a team that we put together to evaluate local development environments. And we said, like, we have to standardize on something, because we have enough people moving between projects now. We just need to make that an easier transition. And, DDEV was just the clear winner for that. And, I would say even, I think it was in 2021 when we adopted the architecture decision record stating that we would use DDEV on our projects. That was adopted with the assumption that would be for new projects, new code bases, not, changing existing projects over. And, going back to like, why has DDEV seen growth? Well, we had teams who were using other development tools for their locals choose to move to DDEV, even though as an organization we weren't mandating it. And I think that's just because of how good it is for developers to use day to day.
I wonder, Randy, you might know this too, but I suspect that a lot of it has to do with how quickly you adopted Mutagen 2 as well. Because, Docker has never been fast on a Mac, and until M1's allowed for Mutagen to exist. And I think DDEV was the fastest tool out there to adopt it.
So when I first got introduced, DDEV predates me by a little bit. I ended up owning it very, very early in its history. But I was suspicious of it because I was the guy that knew how to sling his own environment. I always knew how to set up FPM and Apache on my computer, and it was all fine. When I realized that it was a real win, there are two things that made me understand that. One was that even though I always knew how to get a website going with PHP 5.6 and Apache or Nginx or whatever, I didn't know how to run 2 or 3 or 5 projects with different requirements, like one with a different database type and another one with a different PHP version. I didn't know how to do that. I knew I could probably do it, but I didn't, I couldn't just sling it. And then the second thing, which I think is absolutely critical, is that no team lead should have to spend their whole day maintaining their junior dev's development environment. And I think that's just a huge win with DDEV, is you check in the configuration and everybody has the same configuration, and you do a PR to upgrade it or change it or whatever. So but the thing that sold me was that even though I could sling it all, like all of you could have back in the day, I couldn't sling it all to have multiple requirements.
From a development standpoint, right? And Andrew, you touched on this, right? I used to work with agencies and in agencies where, like, you got to pick what you wanted. Things got complicated, and like then you had to deduce from, oh, this person's on Linux using this local environment, so on and so forth. So like DDEV comes along, other tools come along, right? And they kind of streamline that process. You can add the config to the repo. Everybody's using the same thing. All the versions are right. All the versions are the same. Like standardizes it, makes it a lot easier for everybody. Agree with that 100%. But I also wonder if the growth to DDEV, right, has a little bit of something to do with kind of the lack of improvement in other tools. And then more recently, I think like within the last year, I was like, I'm going to give DDEV a try. And, I was blown away. I was like, oh, DDEV's super fun and like easy. And, I can not have to have Docker. That was another reason I switched, was like licensing Docker was annoying to me. I was like, oh, I can use Kalima and like it works just fine. Right. So I'm wondering, like, does that, do you think that attributes to the growth of DDEV as well?
You mean not needing Docker desktop? I think that that DDEV being agnostic about Docker platforms is fundamental and allows DDEV to move along with various things. Yeah. And I should point out that Andrew was a pioneer with Kalima, made it happen at the very, very beginning. And a pioneer with Mutagen too, right, Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we would have standardized on any Docker-based solution without something like Mutagen in place, because especially going back to 2021, like the performance of code mounts for any solution on Mac was just, it was atrocious, right? it was really not tenable. And for us, we weren't coming, for the teams that did have something standardized, they were using Vagrant typically. And so they did have the, like, you need to have specific project requirements and so on, but they were doing them within whole VMs. We actually did some contribution to Laravel's Homestead project. I don't know if it's still running, but that was a Vagrant-based solution. But then, the other part of it was, when Docker changed their licensing for Docker Desktop, one of the oddities about the way that they chose to implement that is that one of the gates for needing a license is based off of how much revenue the company or organization you work for makes. And for a lot of our, clients who we work with, the developers and the technical teams don't know that. That is private information at these companies. And for them to go start like, okay, do we need to get a license? How much is this going to cost? And so on, was crossing enough organizational boundaries that it was like, hey, we just need something that is easier to work with. And I mean, at the time, it's not like, Docker Desktop was not, in my mind, a great product on the Mac. So it was like, why pay for something that's not going to solve all your problems? Yeah. And I'm so glad to see it today where it's like, Docker Desktop is much more competitive than it used to be. OrbStack is great. Lima, Colima, they're basically the same, they work fine. And we have people on our team who choose what they're happy with, right? And that's fine.
I just wish everybody was on Linux. It's always been fast and just works. But
he's contractually required to say this every time. And I should mention that every instance of Docker is actually running Linux under the hood, and that's why it works. And everything about DDEV is actually running Linux under the hood because Linux is great.
So Randy, you've kind of become the face of DDEV. But one of the things that you mentioned earlier on the call, but also in the project plan, is that you're looking for a third maintainer. Who's the second maintainer? Who else is contributing at a high level?
Yeah, so there's a number of people that contribute at a high level, and Andrew is one of them, but he has other things to do as well. But Stas Zook, I think I said his name correctly. I only know how to say his first name. Stas is a professional developer who works mostly with Laravel, and he lives in Ukraine, and he is absolutely awesome. And he was our added second maintainer last year. He is paid. He works about 30% of the time, but he accomplishes about twice as much as any other person in history. Working full time. Just an absolutely outstanding maintainer, and he's humble, and he helps people all the time, and he's addicted to helping them, and he knows everything about the PHP ecosystem. It's just very impressive. Very, very thankful to have him. But again, we want to have critical mass, and just two of us and one of us being part-time is not quite critical mass. We want that.
We've also done some contract work, right? Like, didn't we pay someone to do documentation work at one point?
You betcha. Yeah. We had some great extra work done last year by another Andrew who worked all over, not just documentation, but he redid the website. He did everything. And of course, we had Simon Gilly from the Typo 3 community for years, not for years as a paid maintainer, but for years as very much an owner. And he disappeared last year, and we don't know where he disappeared to. But that's open source projects have their ups and downs, and that's definitely one of our downs was losing Simon.
Obviously, Randy, you're working on this full time, and I assume that you require electricity. And last time I checked, in most cases, electricity costs money. So I'm assuming that you're getting paid in some way, shape, or form. So the question here is, how's DDEV funded? Like, how does it, air quotes, make money?
So we have, first of all, Platform.sh, the hosting company,
Yes.
stepped up when the originator of DDEV lost its funding. The company was called DRUD, or sometimes it was called DDEV. When it lost its funding and went away, DDEV, I just carried on with DDEV as a volunteer maintainer, and that was all fine. But about a year and a half later, Platform.sh stepped in and not only figured out how to pay me a salary, which was amazing, but they also bought the intellectual property bones of DRUD, which solved the problem of the trademark, the DDEV trademark, and that sort of thing,
okay.
Which was an incredible contribution to the project. And it also signaled to the entire community that DDEV was real and that somebody was standing behind it besides Randy, which was absolutely fantastic. So they pay me a salary, which is very welcome. I would be doing the same thing without it. Don't tell them that, but
nobody will hear this. Don't worry about it.
Because I'm quite addicted to this, and well, you all are addicted to the things that you do. You'd be doing the same thing. So as far as the rest of the funding, it's all community contributions. We have a number of high-level contributors. For example, Tag One gives $1,000 a month to keep things running, and
wow.
Lullabot and several others give very significant amounts annually or monthly, and you can see those on the website. We really think it's absolutely critical for all of the beneficiaries of the agencies and the hosting companies and the individuals to step up and make their own commitments. And that's easy to do on, DDEV.com or GitHub sponsors. It's critical that we all pull together to make this project sustainable over the long term. And as we were just saying, we want to add a third maintainer, and we want to make sure that Stas is properly funded, that kind of thing. Obviously, with a maintainer like Stas, you would hope that the DDEV part of his life grows and the other contracting part of his life decreases, because he's fantastic. But we want to move forward on that.
So you mentioned something there that I want to kind of dig into a little bit more, in the fact that it sounds like Platform SH owns DDEV. Is that an accurate statement?
No, they own the DDEV trademark. They do own the DDEV trademark, but they don't own DDEV. They do license. So there's a DDEV Foundation, which is the fiscal entity for DDEV, and that's where money donations go to. It's a US 501c3 nonprofit. It has its own bank account, and that's how funds get to contract developers or maintainers like Stas. I don't get any of those, and that's by design. Part of that, though, is that Platform.sh doesn't allow outside work. So if they're paying me as an employee, then I can't get money from other places. But I don't know whether I finished answering your question or not, but no, yeah. Platform does not own DDEV. The DDEV Foundation is the fiscal entity for the project, and the project itself is a free and open source project.
And if I remember right, the terms that Platform has licensed the DDEV trademark back to the foundation are pretty broad and generous.
They are.
And it's really just a way for the foundation not to have to shoulder the costs of maintaining and, defending that trademark and all the things that come up with owning a trademark.
That is really a great thing that part of me would like the DDEV Foundation to own the trademark, which would actually be good, but we would never have the capability to defend that trademark. And they have lawyers. It's a wonderful thing.
You heard it here first. They have lawyers, and it's wonderful.
So You've mentioned a couple of times on the podcast that you're addicted to contribution. I think that you really enjoy the community that's going up around DDEV, and it's something that you've kind of committed your professional life to for a long time now. But I am curious, this is something that's always in my mind, just in general with open source, with burnout, with, just it's just one of the things with how open source works. Do you have any plans for DDEV when you retire or move on, or maybe get bored with it? Is there any, have you done any thinking about that?
Well, I mean, that's what all this talk about sustainability is. When you're, we are all finite, and we know that we're all finite in more than one dimension. When you're 68, though, you're more finite than maybe other people are. So I'm plenty finite, and none of us knows how long we can be in a particular role, and that's why we're talking about sustainability and working toward financial sustainability and training maintainers. But I do love what I'm doing, and I'm absolutely committed to it. It's great, it's wonderful, but we're all finite. And like I say, maybe I'm more finite than you are. So
I do think that's been it's been the topic among the DDEV advisory group for 2 years now. So basically ever since we formed it, that was topic number one is, how do we make sure that this product, which we all are getting a lot of value of and enjoy using, and in some cases working on, can continue and not be tied to one person's availability or interests. And that could be right. Very, very tactical, down to the fact that I think, Randy, you still have test runners in your house on mini PCs, where if someone goes out and cuts Randy's internet, there goes a bunch of tests for pull requests, all the way through to the more sort of longer term thinking of Randy retiring or moving on, or wanting to have even just others involved, so that we spread the knowledge out, because Randy's everywhere. He's doing the work, he's doing support, he's doing all these things. And even if Randy is still involved in DDEV, I could see a world where someone like him wants to say, hey, I want to focus on this one area now. I don't want to do everything. And we want to make sure we're ahead of that and not having to react out of some unplanned need.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
It's something that's definitely top of mind. I know Dries has talked about the sustainability of open source at multiple Dries notes, and I've been affected we were talking before the show about Home Assistant, but the Home Assistant community and the Z-Wave community was hit by something similar maybe 3 years ago, when the maintainer of OpenZ, his computer died, and he was the only maintainer of it. And I mean, eventually the community came together and built a whole new system on Node.js to support Z-Wave, because his system was unfortunately, was so fragile and so complex that when his computer died, he couldn't even get it set up again, and he didn't really have other contributors. And so that project just kind of went away. And so the sustainability of open source, open source is great, but sustainability is such a hard problem to solve. So it's good that you're thinking about it long term.
Along those lines, right? We talked about the DDEV Foundation and how it's it's a nonprofit, right? And it supports the DDEV open source project, similarly to how the Drupal Association supports Drupal, right? I'm wondering, does
sorry, I have a really dumb question. As you were asking that, John, it popped in my head, and I have to ask it now. What was the thinking of DDEV Foundation over DDEV Association? Is it like there's Linux Foundation? There, why is the Drupal Association and not Drupal Foundation?
There was no thinking. There was no thinking. It was all about making an application.
Wait, are you asking
Randy, Secretary of State?
Are you asking Randy to elaborate or demystify why the Drupal Association is an association?
No, it's more like, I've never thought about this until you were asking that question. But most open source I guess, nonprofits that are set to guard the nonprofit. I mean, the open source project are called foundation, except for the Drupal Association. But I was wondering if there was a reason why the DDEV Foundation was called DDEV Foundation. Anyway, sorry for the
Sorry to
diversion.
disappoint you.
You got to incite someone from the DA on and ask them as that question.
I'm going to ask Tim and see if he knows. It probably is something like that, like maybe the Drupal Association where it was created. They call them associations there. Who knows? But anyway, back to your question, John.
All right. So again, the DDEV Foundation being similar to the Drupal Association, right? And the fact that it's a supporting organization for an open source project. I'm wondering, you know, based on the last question, right? Randy retires, moves on, gets bored, whatever the outcome is there, right? Like, does the DDEV Foundation have employees, board members, like others in a place to kind of like just keep moving on?
So we have, there's a couple of answers. Number one, we don't have employees.
Okay.
Number two, we do have an advisory group, which everybody is welcome to. It's an informal governance organization that Andrew has been in from the beginning. We meet the first Wednesday of every second month. So we have one coming up in July, and you can sign up for that meeting on our meetup, which is in the notes here. And we would love to have you there. It's a place to really keep in touch with what really is going on. But that's a very, very informal level of governance. Essentially, I'm the BDFL, or the Benevolent Dictator for Life. And in the end, at this point in the life of the organization, I end up making the decisions if there's a decision made. And that is very, very informal governance and doesn't lend itself toward adequate long-term organizational status. And so that's one of the things that we're working on. I'm very cautious about it because I have been in this position before and grew an organization out of my own BDFL status, and it went to hell. And one of the board members went rogue, and it was a very, very unpleasant situation that I ended up just exiting. The organization still exists, probably because I got it organized, but it went forward. I don't think it went forward as well, but we don't want that kind of thing happening. And so that's why one of our agenda items for this year is to move toward more formal governance, probably a membership type situation, probably some kind of a financial commitment to that. But we haven't, and it may not happen this year, but it's on the agenda for growing maturity. We do have a second person on the bank account. So we have a second signer on the bank account. So if I disappear, the money is not gone from the foundation or inaccessible.
All right, that all makes sense, and I think that you know, I think that you explained it very well. So thank you for doing that.
Okay, so turning away from the more morbid side of open source maintainership.
Whoa. What's morbid about retiring, moving on, or just getting bored? I don't understand, Nick.
Actually, the greater risk in tiny open source projects is like what happened to XZ recently. And it is a great object lesson for open source. If you don't know, there was a nation state attack against the XZ project, which is a tiny project, maybe tinier than DDEV, probably tinier than DDEV, which, you know, the maintainer got tired and a nation state actor stepped in and became a maintainer, got adequate privileges, and almost took down the entire internet. And we don't want that of our little open source projects. We want them to have sustainable, robust communities with people that aren't burned out and who don't have to listen when people, you know, don't have. This guy they created whiners in the community to make it feel like he was under pressure, and it was a very bad situation.
It was a very sophisticated attack. There's a couple of good YouTube short YouTube videos, but I think Level 1 Learning, we'll put this in the show notes to talk about exactly what happened. It was very sophisticated. It was very clever. The person that found it in a really serendipitous way due to testing and a lot of rigor around their own processes. But yeah, it's definitely, now that that's happened once, you don't know. The thing is, I suspect that's the kind of thing that we need to, in an open source community, start looking for, because you don't build something that sophisticated the first time and get it right. And even though they were caught, the way they were caught means that, like, they weren't caught because of technical incompetence. They were basically caught because of a couple of like serendipitous things.
There was a bug in their code with timing, right?
Yeah.
Well, they were caught because some guy was like, "Hey, my computer processes increased by like an X factor. That's weird. Let me dig into why." Right?
Yeah.
Like,
and he was also getting some warnings on some, I forget what it's called, like Viking or something, that tracks changes or something. So he got some. There was a little bit more to that, but still, like, the level of sophistication doesn't get right the first time. They tested that elsewhere. They must have. So
the other thing is
to find it.
I think this is why, and Randy, I think, was the one who led this. The DDEV Foundation actually takes some of the contributions that are given to it and passes those upstream to other open source projects that we depend on, because DDEV is built upon a ton of tiny open source projects. And if any one of those, if Xdebug becomes abandoned and not maintained, like, that's a serious issue for every PHP developer.
That's one of the things I think about sometimes. Sometimes maintaining a single module, I think the biggest module that I have right now, and I didn't create it, but I'm now maintaining it, has like 13 or 14,000 people using it. And sometimes the pressure when there's issues created feels like a lot of pressure. And then you just scale it up, and then you have like DDEV, you have, thousands of people using that project. Then you have Drupal, and then you get to like PHP. Like, I can't imagine the level of pressure to like maintain something like that long term for years. Like, how long has Xdebug been around? It's been 20 years.
20 years.
And Drupal's been around for the same amount of time, but Drupal has, I would guess, a lot more maintainers for it. I don't know. Anyway, getting back to the technical side, one of the things I'm really curious about is how you develop DDEV. What is it written in? I think it started out as a lot of just bash scripts, but you've hinted at some architectural changes recently. What is
the
DDEV?
basic part of DDEV, the orchestration part of DDEV has always been written in Go. And Go is an excellent compiled language. One of the most beautiful things about it is that it can be built as a binary that has no dependencies, and it can be cross-compiled for any environment and any architecture. It's just a beautiful thing. It's also kind of an old school language. You can write it in a pretty simple format. It doesn't require a lot of real thinking, and I essentially write Go like I've written many languages. I am definitely no purist on doing it exactly the Go way. There is a lot of code, but it's mostly orchestration code. So the Go code will start up a project, but the project is actually defined using Docker Compose, which is a wrapper on Docker. And then Docker is actually running little Linux computers on your system. So each of those little computers has to be configured properly, has to have, so maybe there's Nginx config, Apache config, PHP config, maybe there's bash scripts that are inside it. And so it's that combination of so many things. It's like a whole deployment environment, except that it's running on your computer inside Docker. And you can think of the Go code as the orchestrator of it all.
I would say as a user, one of the great parts about it is that you get that single binary and it's super fast. You never have that lag where you press enter and you're like waiting for this giant Node.js app to spin itself up and get going before it can do, or Python or any interpreted language, you can have that lag. From a I'll call it a contributor standpoint, but even just a trying to figure out when things are going wrong standpoint, let's say you want to know if the latest version of DDEV fixes an issue for you. You don't necessarily have to change your locals and upgrade DDEV the way you would normally do. You can just go to GitHub, download the DDEV program, extract it, run that directly, and see what happens, right? It's really easy to test out a pull request change or what's going on with the head release of DDEV. And I think a lot of other tool sets out there, like we imagine Go was written in Node.js or Python, that's a lot harder of a user experience to build. Coupled with the fact that Docker itself is written in Go. And so when DDEV needs to talk to Docker directly, all of the, all what the Docker developers are thinking of first is Go. And so, all the support is there.
Yeah, I'll say too, since you mentioned it, as a developer, as a user interacting with DDEV, the nice thing is you can kind of just pull it down and put it in your path and it'll work. And then from there, my interaction is generally just like a couple of commands, like start and it, like those kinds of things. And then maybe occasionally tweaking the config file, right? Like yesterday, I just updated a PHP for a particular site. So I went into config and bumped the version and was done. Or I'm creating like a custom bash script for like building the site or running PHP stand or something like that. So from an outsider just using the tool, like the surface is really small. Like you only have to learn a couple of different things and you're good to go. Although the most recent quirk with DDEV, and this is not Randy or Andrew's fault whatsoever, is the issue I think we mentioned a couple weeks ago with MariaDB breaking stuff. So all my clients have updated all their MariaDB, and a couple of them didn't tell me when they did. So then I have to try to start the project, and then DDEV would just be like, "We can't start this. It's on MariaDB 10.6, and you're currently on 10.3. Roll it back." But I will say, again, even that process, all it takes is just copying the command that it tells me to run to migrate it, updating the config to be the older version, and then running the command, and it just works. So like even when things go wrong, like it literally tells you the command to run to fix it. And I'd say almost always it works.
Yeah, it's one of those nice things because like I always tell people like I know how to write enough code to be dangerous. Like nobody really like wants me developing their website, right? But DDEV is so easy to use is not the right term, but so nice in the way that it handles changes like the one Nick just talked about. Or for example, a Kalima update happened a couple of months ago now. And, when I started my DDEV project, it said, hey, Kalima's updated, like run this command to take snapshots of everything, update or restart Kalima and then restart DDEV and like everything will be fine. And like, sure enough, it was basically hand holding me through the process in such a nice way that like, I really appreciated that. So thank you both of you for putting that thought into how, people interact with DDEV.
One of the great things, I think that one of the fundamental things that makes DDEV successful, and we didn't talk about this before, it is in fact the community. It's the fact that the community has been bringing their issues and their needs into the discussion for all these years. It's coming up on 8 years probably. And the community brings in, like, we need this. This is broken. Last month, MariaDB broke all of the MySQL dumps in the world by adding a new directive to the MySQL dump command. And we heard about it immediately because the community was there. And so we were able to put on some Band-Aids. And then in last week's release, we were able to hopefully completely work around it. But it's only because we have that community connection. So it's great.
The wild thing too about how they broke it is they broke it in such a way that even if you were running, a lot of my clients are on Platform SH, and a lot of those projects were still using 10.3, but Platform SH, I mean, they did the right thing here, so this isn't a complaint whatsoever, but they updated the MySQL dump
On the client.
for all the client, because they had to, like, it was a security issue. Well, MySQL dump, the upgraded MySQL dump as a sandbox directive, even for older versions in MariaDB, so all the backups broke, which is one of the reasons why all my clients, just like the clients that have their own developers on staff, updated MariaDB without, before I got to them, and I experienced that quirk. But
and I think that is all transparent now in v1.23.2, which came out last week. So I think that the vast majority of people will not be even seeing that problem now because of DDEV handling that.
Oh, nice.
All right, let's jump into a little bit of a lightning round here, where we ask you guys a couple of questions, and we get I don't know, abbreviated answers. We won't say short because that's we want you guys to be able to give full answers. Andrew, let's start with you. What's your favorite feature of DDEV?
Yeah, it's got to be the mutagen support, right? Like, I don't think I could use it. I'm a Mac user, but we've got people who are on Windows as well, and I think it's maybe not as important, but it's still. Forget, Randy, if it's on by default for Windows users or not.
On traditional Windows, it is.
Right.
On WSL2, you don't need it. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, there was a time when they really needed it, but it just makes it so easy to use, and it makes using DDEV feel like it's running without any virtualization layer, right? Like, it's just, things are super quick. The absolute worst is like spinning up a new project for the first time, and it's doing that very first sync. It takes 10 or 15 seconds or whatever it is, and that's that. But to me, like, I'm actually like, it's one of those things that whenever I look at any other local development environment stack for any ecosystem that's built with Docker, I'm always like, do you really think everyone's using Linux on your laptop? Like, Linux is great, but that's just not the world we live in.
Awesome. Randy, I'm going to ask you the same question. What's your favorite DDEV feature?
I probably like Snapshot the best. DDEV Snapshot takes a quick, raw binary dump of your database and gives it a name. And so when it's great for backup, but if you're doing something like a migration, usually you get to incremental places where, I would like to start from this place next time. I don't want to, like, I know it's working. Now I'm going to muck with it, and I want to know what the next place is. And so with a snapshot, you can record each of those places and restore to it and start over again with the problem that you had. And so I've always loved that.
I want to call out, like, one of the things that's like a neat feature of DDEV is its flexibility around the database, and that some of our projects actually work with a pattern where they don't use the database container that DDEV ships with. They ship their own database container, and it actually has a copy of the database like in the container itself, that in the container image that you download. And if you're testing update hooks or migrations or anything like that, you don't even have to do the import. You just restart the database container and it throws away all your changes since since that image. And so if you've got a 20 gigabyte database, it's like, it's no big deal. It takes me 5 seconds to reset. And the fact that DDEV has this great sort of out of the box solution for most cases, but then when you run into special cases, it's not that big of a deal to change it out, is really nice.
Do I get to answer the question next?
No, it was only for Randy and Andrew. No, just move on to the next question.
What? No, but I have so many things that are my favorite.
Yeah, I know. That's why I didn't ask you.
I was waiting. Okay. We are getting close to, well, Now our listeners are going to want to know. I think
Yeah.
I can't even pick one.
We'll put a
I
blog
think-
post out later where
Yeah.
Nick
No,
goes
I-
through every single feature in detail and why it's
No.
his favorite.
I'll just say I think my favorite thing is probably the consistency, because other tools, and I've built my own tools like DDEV in the past. The thing is, as nice as Docker is, making it like, the dream is that it can be separate and isolated, but it's very easy to kind of poison the well and make things bleed, or make things just not quite work quite correctly. And things like Xdebug or PHPMadmin, like those kinds of tools, getting to work on every single project still took some effort sometimes. And DDEV is just consistent. Like I never have to worry about something like that working one to the next. And I used to always have to tinker. That was one of the last places I had to tinker before DDEV. Okay, now that I got that out of my system, Randy and Andrew, let's start with you, Randy. Maybe what is next for DDEV?
Well, our biggest and hardest problems are the most important. They're community and sustainability and finance. So those are not my areas of greatest expertise. And so those always have to continue being focused. So the sustainability includes governance, it includes marketing, it includes doing that actual work that gets people to make the commitment to the finances, and growing the maintainers so that we have the good maintainers. But as far as features, we have some great things in the pot right now. The DDEV XH GUI add-on, it does a great thing with providing an easy to use profiler, uses XHprop in the background. So that's an add-on. It'll probably stay an add-on because it adds an extra container, but it's become an official add-on now. And so that's one of the things. We hope to have an explicit Node.js backend like we have a PHP FPM backend. And so that's one of the things to do this year. And an add-on registry. Add-ons have gotten a little out of control. There's a DDEV get command to see what they all are, but there are so many that you can't, with a one-line description, you can't really understand. So we hope to have a web-based add-on registry this year.
I have a feature request that would help with add-ons. If I say, if I run DDEV PHPMadmin, it'll go like, hey, you haven't installed the plugin here. If it could just install it, or like prompt me, like, do you want to install this add-on? Make my life so much easier. The amount of time
That's a good idea.
I end up having to go to GitHub to find out what the command is every single time because I can never remember.
That is a good idea, and that's not that hard. Yeah,
I can make an issue. I can make a feature request.
You could actually do a PR. All it is a custom command. Yeah.
If you want to walk me through that, I will. Yeah, happily contribute that back.
Look at it. Look at this. Randy's teaching a guy to fish.
I need to be more careful about feature requests on the podcast because I always talk myself into. But yeah, happy to work on that. Okay. Anything you'd like to add to that, Andrew? What do you think is next for DDEV?
Yeah, I mean, I think Randy covered all of, like, I'll say the new features, new capabilities. One thing that's, like, I think important for people to understand about a project like this is there's software you can write where you could probably call it done and not make any changes to it for 2, 3, 5 years, maybe longer, and it's still going to work. You can download it, compile it. It's, the instructions are not going to change. And DDEV is like the opposite of that. Whether it's changes in, something like MariaDB, like what we talked about, or, what if, we've certainly had Mac OS updates that cause things to go awry. It wouldn't surprise me if people are starting to think about, hey, does DDEV need to support Windows on ARM machines? I don't know if we're already doing builds for that, but even like, I don't even know what the new Qualcomm ARM processors support in terms of virtualization. Like, does WSL2 work on them? All that kind of stuff. And so, like, because the entire ecosystem underneath DDEV keeps changing, there is a ton of maintenance involved in DDEV just to keep the lights on. And that's kind of invisible work, but without it, like DDEV would like fall apart in 6 to 12 months.
It would, and maybe even less than that. It's constant. And, you know, if you think about it, we're going to have PHP 8.4 very shortly here. So that requires a certain amount of work. We have a PR right now to get MariaDB 11.4 in there. MySQL 8.4 is now out and ready. We only do LTS versions, but all of those things as the time moves along. And I should mention that we still support PHP 5.6 for when you're trying to revive an ancient site, which all of us have had to come to terms with that from time to time. So the amount of maintenance to keep DDEV running, it's easier to think of DDEV as a service than it is to think of it as a product, because essentially we're back there trying to make sure that you can move forward with your stuff without you having to figure out what they did to MySQL dump, and without you having to sort that out with your team and everybody on your team trying to sort it out. Instead, you've got that DDEV service helping you out with that because the new version has it solved.
So Randy, real quick, if people wanted to help maintain DDEV, keep the DDEV train moving, how could they get involved?
Well, we have the contributor trainings every so often. Those are in the show notes. We've been doing those about every couple of weeks. There's a whole bunch of those recorded. We have extensive documentation, including developer documentation. But come see us in the DDEV Discord, which is also in the show notes. Come see us, join in, ask questions, talk about what you need. Come to the issue queue, make your feature request. Like I say, it really is the community's involvement that has made DDEV what it is, because we get to hear what actually is going on, and it's a huge win for all of us.
Well, Randy and Andrew, thank you for joining us today. And again, Randy, thank you for helping out for the last 4 weeks as our guest host.
It's been lovely.
Do you have questions or feedback? Reach out to Talking Drupal on Twitter with the handle Talking Drupal, or by email with show@talkingdrupal.com. You can connect with our hosts and other listeners on Drupal Slack in the Talking Drupal channel.
And you can promote your Drupal community event on Talking Drupal. Learn more at talkingdrupal.com/TDpromo.
Get the Talking Drupal newsletter to learn more about our guest hosts, show news, upcoming shows, and much more. Sign up for the newsletter at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
And thank you, patrons, for supporting Talking Drupal. Your support is greatly appreciated. You can learn more about becoming a patron at talkingdrupal.com and choose Become a Patron. All right, Randy, if our listeners want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Join us in Discord is the easiest place. You'll find me there. But I'm RFA on Drupal.org. I'm RFA on Drupal Slack and most other places. Randy Fay on Twitter.
And Andrew, if our listeners want to get in touch with you?
Yeah, the best place in the wider community is drupal.community/deviantintegral. That's where I'm on the Drupal community Mastodon instance. Otherwise, you can find me through my Drupal.org contact form or reach out to me through Lullabot as well.
And John, how about you?
You can find me on all the major social networks and Drupal.org at John Picozzi, and you can find out about EPAM at epam.com.
You can find me pretty much everywhere at Nixman, NICXVAN.
If you've enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking.
See you guys next week.